Hello and welcome to the Literary House Party with me, Kate Helm, aka Kate Harrison, author of The House Share, and your hostess with the mostess, possibly, for today's House Share, which is the special programme where I ask some of your favourite thriller authors for a little bit of an insight into what they're like on the domestic sphere, and also get them to pick some housemates from the celebrity or literary world and find out exactly what would happen to them. So today I am delighted to welcome the internationally best-selling thriller author and writer of just fantastic mysteries, conspiracy thrillers, Tony Kent. Hopefully he will be appearing in the next 3 seconds. There we go. Here he is.
There?
You are here, I
Hello.
hope. Well. Hello. So, as I say, Tony writes some fantastic thrillers, the latest of which is Power Play, and they are action-packed. This one starts with an explosive moment and just keeps going in that same vein. So, Tony, it's good to have you here. It sounds like you're pretty busy with your life, writing, being a barrister, and also a boxer, according to your website.
Formerly, yes, a while ago. it's been a while since I think I could claim to be that though.
Oh well, we'll hear a little bit more about all of those things and what you're like on the domestic sphere later on.
Well, I've locked my wife out so she can't tell you that I'm lying. So.
Well, you know what? Everybody who has been doing this has totally been. Well, it was all looking good until yesterday. Tammy Cohen appeared and she had some photographs from her student life, which was the first time she ever left home, and one of her housemates turned up, so it meant she couldn't exaggerate about her responsibilities or what she used to get up to. So hopefully you're safe. We'll see what happens there. So one of the things we're going to do, and anyone that's watching may want to play along, is I have actually already asked Tony to pick 3 potential housemates who are going to join him in his mysterious house share. We're going to go through those a bit later, but do you want to just tell us who they are first of all, without telling us where you're going to consign them?
Okay, one of them is Evander Holyfield, who is one of my favourite all-time boxers, former 3-time world heavyweight champion. The other is Dr. Hannibal Lecter from the Silence of the Lambs books and films, and the other is Shane Ritchie. And I'm not going to put too much emphasis on his name in case it makes you work out immediately where he's going.
Okay, so anyone who wants to play along, you can guess as to who might be going in the kitchen of this imaginary house share, the bedroom, and also who might be consigned to being locked in the cellar. So there we go. We're going to talk a little bit about your books in a while, but first of all, I just wonder, Tony, what kind of a housemate are you?
I've asked my wife this because I thought, I imagine we all kid ourselves about what kind of a housemate we are. Apparently, I'm okay. There are problems, of course. There are things that I do that annoy her, but I'm very clean. I am fastidiously clean, which I think is certainly if I were ever looking for a housemate again, the very first thing I want is someone who is fastidiously clean. I think that probably comes from being clean yourself. It's a very important thing for me. I probably don't do quite as much around the house as I should. I certainly noticed that my wife seems to do a lot more than I do, which when I asked her about that, she didn't deny it.
Are there any chores that you particularly love or loathe, or either?
I love cooking. Absolutely love cooking, and if I had time, I would cook every single meal. My wife isn't particularly interested in cooking at all. I think it's a food thing. I think it's a whether you like eating thing. And I love to eat, hence I am larger than I should be. My wife is rail thin and slim. Sorry, the word should be rail slim, and could take it or leave it. And I think that may explain why it is that I love the cooking side of things. I also find it as one of the very few things that make me switch off completely. I spend a couple of hours cooking something, and I'm not thinking about my day job. I'm not thinking about books. I'm not thinking about writing and social media and all the different things that otherwise seem to keep us all occupied the whole time. So I think for me, cooking because I love to eat, and also because it's almost the only real release. It's like a mini holiday in the day.
Have your lockdown scenario caused you any challenges with essential ingredients?
Everyone thinks they're a baker.
Yes.
Everyone's become a baker. There's no flour anywhere, which is really annoying because I like to cook sauces, and you can't cook a good sauce without plain flour. But everyone's become a baker, and all I see on Instagram and Twitter is bread. And it's really, really frustrating. I try to avoid eating gluten, so it's completely pointless me making bread. But you know, I'll tolerate it. There are certain things that it's worth having gluten for, even if gluten's a problem for you. And a good sauce is one of them. But no, everyone's become a baker, so I can't get any flour, and that's really frustrating.
It really is. And what about the chores that you loathe? Is there anything you couldn't be convinced to do at any cost?
I hate cleaning the bathroom. I really, really don't like cleaning the bathroom. And I have to say, I don't think I've cleaned a bathroom for about 7 years. So I hate it so much that it's not even on the agenda anymore. The bathroom seems to miraculously clean itself. I'm not sure how that happens. I think it may have something to do with my wife, and also something to do with the lady that used to turn up once a week, and things would smell nice afterwards.
Yes, exactly. So, okay, we're bathrooms out. Kitchen is definitely in. So
I love the kitchen. I even like cleaning the kitchen.
Oh, well, yeah, because there's a certain sort of organisational delight in getting everything back to where it was and ready for the next.
Well, I do like the challenge of, we have a really big kitchen. The reason we took this house is we lived in a really small flat in Chelsea before we had our son. And then when Victoria was pregnant with Joseph, we thought, yeah, we've got to move. We can't be in a one-bedroom flat. It's lovely. Chelsea's great, etc., etc. We've got to get out. And so we moved to what to us was the country, which is Buckinghamshire. So still very close to the M25. But you know, from our sort of, we've lived in cities for 20, 25 years. It's the country. And I walked into this house when we were looking at houses. I walked into this one, and that was it. We were having it because the kitchen literally is bigger than our old flat. And I used to cook in a tiny, tiny kitchen. I mean, it was the width of the galley kitchen, but it was also the length of the width of a galley kitchen. And I do big meals in there. And it was just to suddenly have all of this space. It's a pleasure. It's just a pleasure to clean it. It's a pleasure to cook in it. It's my favorite room in the house by miles. Hence, I do all these recordings there.
Yeah, perfect. So let's find out then, which lucky person of your choices are you going to have with you in the kitchen?
Well, I'm going to go with something based more on a TV show than on the book version. I don't know if you ever saw the TV show. Brian Fuller made a 3-season TV show of Hannibal, which was all based on the was it Will Graham, the investigator in Hannibal. And I thought it ended badly. I thought the 3rd season was terrible, but the first 2 seasons were fabulous. And one of the best things about them was the cooking, the meals that Hannibal made. And I think if you can keep him away from the shop, as long as he's not buying the ingredients, that's somebody you want to have in your kitchen. so in my kitchen, I'm going to be sharing my kitchen with Hannibal Lecter, but he's not allowed Waitrose.
Yes, that's a very good point. You think you'll be competing kind of on a night, every other night, to try and cook something more extraordinary? Exactly.
I mean, and he would absolutely win, hands down. I'll hold myself against most people, but that show, I mean, the food, it was food porn. It was almost the ideal kind of show for a thriller writer that likes to cook, because it was so well crafted and so well done and just brilliantly performed and great, and also elements of food porn thrown in. And if you could just pretend he wasn't eating people, it was really, I'd love to be honest, there's some people I'd probably still I don't like enough. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So how did you, all right then, so you've got this foodie enthusiasm, you obviously love Hannibal, you've obviously got lots of different life experiences to pick from for your books. How did you end up picking this internationally set, very action-packed thriller genre of all the options you could have taken?
I like to think of the way I write as writing a movie. And I don't mean that I wanted to be made into a movie. I'm sure we all do. We'd all love that. But I like the idea that if you read my book, whether there's a film of it or not, that when you read my books, you can see them in your head, that you can basically read them as a film. I like the idea that somebody will go on holiday and they will read my book and they will forget that they're burning. I mean, I don't want to cause them any pain, but I just like the idea that you can be so engrossed in something and so caught up in something. And I love the idea of them being cast. I read a book when I was about 18 or 19 called The Winner by David Bardagian. It's the first time this ever happened to me. I read this book and I was halfway through it and I was casting it. And I was thinking, oh, Mel Gibson will be really good for that role. Because remember, this is a while ago now. Mel Gibson will be great for that role. Kevin Spacey would be great. And that was the first time that ever happened to me. And since then, that's what I want to read, books like that. And therefore, that became what I want to write. And for me, the kind of movies that I like and the kind of books that I like are the kind of books that I write. And so that kind of dictated the genre that I went for. And it began with Killer Intent, which was very UK based. And then Marked for Death is actually, the second book is quite a big departure because one of my characters, I have two main characters in my books. One is Michael Devlin, one is Joe Dempsey. Michael Devlin is a barrister, which is what I do for a day job. And he's a barrister with a dark past. He comes from Northern Ireland. He comes from a family of villains and he stepped away from that. But he gets dragged into something in the first book that means he has to go back to this estranged family to protect him. And it really isn't about him being a barrister. He gets dragged into something because of what he does for a living, but it's not really about him being a barrister at all. And then someone told me when I was getting around to write the second book, it was going to be about, it wasn't going to be about Michael, it was going to be about Joe Dempsey. And a friend of mine who was in the publishing world, and I was very new to the whole thing, said, no, you should write about the lawyer because you are a lawyer and there isn't an English John Grisham. Obviously, he had not heard of Steve Kavanagh. So I took the advice. I didn't have a publishing contract yet. So I took the advice and I wrote Marked for Death, which is actually a legal thriller, purely legal thriller. There's a serial killer and there's a trial. And it's almost a different genre. But then Power Play, my new one, is much more like the first book. And that's the genre that I'll stay in. So the second book is very British, very London-based serial killer trial at the Old Bailey, but it's a bit of an anomaly. I mean, it's very much part of the series because it's still Michael Devlin. But as I say, the books that I will stay in, the genre I'll stay with is the one that you've identified, the sort of big international blockbuster kind of action-packed political thriller, because I want to see that in my head, and I hope other people do too.
And do you enjoy that larger canvas?
I do. I much prefer that. At the end, my two main characters are both British, but at the end of Killer Intent, I send one of them off to New York to join this new sort of newfangled United Nations Security Council investigatory body that I'd invented in order to let him have the world. Because I just think there are so many stories that you can tell around the world that you can't just keep telling in London. I mean, London's big and it's international and all that business, but I lived there almost my entire life and I know the limits it has. Whereas if you have the world, people's imaginations can stretch that much further. And in reality, the limits that apply to London probably apply to the rest of the world. But you don't have to let it because the people reading aren't necessarily from those places.
Brilliant. So we're going to return to your house sharing imagination. We've dealt with Hannibal,
and the
who
kitchen
is going to be your chef de partie, or you're going to share the cooking rota. So what about the bedroom?
Well, when you ask me the question of the bedroom, obviously your brain goes in one direction, doesn't it? And I mentioned it to my wife and she kicked me. And so I had to think of a different aspect of who would I want in the bedroom that isn't necessarily in my bed. So we're going to set a little camp bed up in the corner. My son at the moment has a little Lightning McQueen bed in the corner of our room for when he stays down with us. So we can get rid of that. We're going to put a nice little camp bed in and we're going to fill it with Evander Holyfield. And the reason we're going to fill it with Evander Holyfield is not so that my wife has something nice to look at in the morning, although she will have. I'm fairly confident she'll be looking left and not right. But mainly because during the lockdown, we've obviously had this wonderful opportunity to train and to what a time it was to sort of improve ourselves. And it's coming to an end in its roundabout form. I was in court yesterday, I mean, for the first time in 9 weeks. So it's coming to an end. and I put my suit on for court. And when I put my suit on, I did not find it too easy to do up the trousers, and the chest was sticking out a bit more than it should. And it dawned on me that I'm sitting literally 30 feet from a nice big double garage that we have that I converted into a boxing gym 2 years ago. I have not stepped foot in it during the time that we've been on lockdown. I mean, it's just no excuse at all, and yet I've just grown exponentially fatter for the course of the last 9 weeks. And so Evander Holyfield will be in my room because it will take, it seems, because my wife's tried really hard. She's tried to get me up to get in the gym, etc. I think it's going to take somebody who can win a world heavyweight title to get my fat backside out of bed and into a gym. And I think he's going to have to be in the room to be really persistent. So Evander Holyfield, in order to get me up and on a punch bag, is going to have to be on the camp bed in the corner of the room. But he's not allowed in there with my wife when I'm not in there.
I think that's perfectly reasonable. How will she respond to that requirement or restriction?
I think she'd be fine with the restriction. Yeah, I think so. I think she likes fat guys.
Fair enough. It's interesting, the motivation thing though, isn't it? Because I think so many of us have felt in lockdown that kind of the theory of what we were all going to do at the beginning, whether it was to become massively fit or to, I don't know, write a stage play or kind of learn how to cook incredible levels of cordon bleu cuisine. Yeah. Most of us, it hasn't happened that way. And yet you can't be an unmotivated person. You have been a boxer in the past. You have a day job alongside writing your novels. Those are things that take a certain amount of attention and motivation.
Well, I think I need a deadline of some sort. Now, whether that deadline is that I've got to get into a boxing ring and box somebody who's highly trained and can take people's heads off, and I therefore need to be equally highly trained and able to take people's heads off, whether it's that, whether it's that I'm going into the Court of Appeal and 3 of the cleverest people in the country are about to eviscerate me on legal principles, or whether it's because my publishers are going to sue me for not making a deadline, I think I need a deadline. And the problem with the lockdown is they just gave us time, but they also gave us uncertainty, and they gave us no deadline. Because and that's no criticism, because I think we're going back too soon. I think the schools are going back to, I think everything they're doing at the moment is purely economic. They've not taken the science advice on it, and we're all just being sent back. And it's a matter of, you guys are going to have to die before the economy does. And I do think that's what's happening. So I don't criticize them earlier on for having no deadline. Of course, they couldn't have one. But I think that's the main problem, is that we were all in limbo. I think, and being in limbo, no matter how motivated a person you are, being in limbo is difficult, and it's very difficult to take on a project. I mean, for example, the best period of time that I would have while working to write a book, to write my books, is when a jury goes out. So I spend a long time, I'll write on trains, I'll write during my lunch hour. There are some, I shouldn't admit this on Facebook, but there are some periods of a trial where you could write, because there are some things that just don't affect your client at all. There might be half an hour of reading out interviews, or an hour of reading out interviews that you have on paper, but they have to be read into the record. And you could spend that hour even doing some writing. But the thing where you have loads of time to do writing is when a jury go out to consider their verdict. So the jury go, and they could be out. The longest I've ever had a jury out is 3 weeks. Wow. But the problem is, and you've got nothing to do in that time. It's the one period where there's nothing to do. I have never written a word while a jury are out, because you don't know when they're coming back. And I do think it's all
limbo, isn't it?
It's limbo. Yeah. I don't think you can be effective in limbo.
Because it could be any second, or it could be you're being sent home again, and you don't know.
And I think the lockdown is just an extended, slightly different version of that.
Waiting for the jury to come in on life or death matters.
Exactly.
Certainly. Do you think that what's happening at the moment will change your approach, or change what you're writing, especially with this international setting? Well,
weirdly enough, I've actually got a YouTube channel that I've made now, that began with what I'm about to tell you. I was a third of the way in to writing my 4th book. And I was calling it The Devil's Blood. And the reason I was calling it The Devil's Blood, it was all about a pathogen, a virus in a child's blood that was there to cause a pandemic. and it was being used. It was weaponized by a rogue Asian state, North Korea, as opposed to China. And basically, it was just too close. And it was all about preventing the pandemic rather than there being one. So it wasn't exactly the same thing. But I was aware of a number of things. I thought, well, if this comes out next year when it's supposed to come out, well, then it's going to be called a pandemic book, even though there's no pandemic. But we'll never get away from that. I also thought, even if it's not about it, it is about it. A lot of people are going to die, and I've got no interest in profiting off of that. I don't think morally I could do that. So for a variety of reasons, I abandoned that book. And I started a new one, and I had to start it from scratch. The reason I had the YouTube channel was I thought people would be interested, and it turns out they're not really. People would be interested in following someone who's writing an idea that's literally a one-line idea when they sit at the computer. And so I spoke about it every day for about 13 or 14 episodes, how it was developing from a single line, because I've never written like that before. I'm not a big plotter, but I'm also not that much of a go with the seat of your pants person.
Yeah.
And that book was, because I'd abandoned the other one, that book was very, very vehemently not going to be anything to do with COVID-19. And it's now become a fairly important part of the plot. And it was never going to be. It's set next year. Luckily, Power Play is actually set this year, but it's set in January and the beginning of February. So we just managed to avoid it. But because I write on a big scale with things like, you've got the president is in the background and politics, etc., it became important to the plot of the fourth book that there's this terrorist organization that is the driving force of the book. And actually, they are a resurgent terrorist organization. It's all about the Patriot movement in America. And in my book, they've become resurgent because of the lockdown and because the federal government in America has now had to well, my president in my book is way better than Trump, and actually locked down properly. And the result of that is, yes, COVID-19 is dealt with properly, but those people who don't like the lockdown have become much more of a strong political movement. So what? And that was not supposed to happen at all. That was never the plan. But I think the problem is it's permeated our world so much, hasn't it? I mean, it's part of every day. It's like writing a book in 1914 and ignoring the First World War. You just can't do it.
Yes, but I guess because it's not wholly focused on it, but it's just in the consciousness, as it is for all of us. Exactly. That is probably the best way of handling it if you're going to write a book that is
absolutely. There's a consequence of COVID-19.
Totally. No, that sounds really good. I like this. I think that'll be great. When's your deadline then, if it's coming out next year?
No idea. I think it's September.
A while.
My publishers are being very, very nice about it because they know I had to abandon the book, and they agreed that I would have finished it. I was far enough in, but also far enough into the momentum of what would have been the fourth book that I would have finished that by now. I was a third in when I abandoned it. It would have been done because I was at that momentum where you can write thousands of words a day. Whereas on the first book, on the fourth book now that I'm now to rewrite, I'm still not quite at that point where it's churning itself out. And so they are understanding because they agreed with why it had to go.
Good stuff. Let's talk about the one you have got that people can read at the moment then, which is Power Play. So I am really intrigued as to how you balance the little details, like where people live and how they live the non-work part of their lives with the action, which is what we see in the films, is what people really want to read about when they come to a book like this. Tell me a bit about how you balance that.
Well, I think when you're, I think this may come from what I do in my day job, possibly, or it might not. But I like to make sure there are no gaps. I like to be able to. It's logic, really. I like to see a logical point. I like a journey from A to B and all the way to Z. And for me, I don't want people going to the loo, but I do want to see people thinking things through and talking things through. And nothing annoys me more in a book than when you see someone who just jumps to a conclusion and that conclusion's right. I want to see my characters work out what's happening. And it's much too common that where you see suddenly a conclusion's been reached and you think, oh right, I can see how he got to that, I guess, but I didn't see it happen. And I'd quite like to talk things through and just get to know the characters. I think it's important to know your characters. Although my books are very plot driven, but I do think they are equally character driven. I feel that my main characters, I feel, are very real, and I think that I do like very much to make my supporting characters equally real, even though we're probably never going to see them again. I want everyone to feel that they know the people they're looking at. Power play begins with, as you say, an explosion. It begins with an explosion of a plane. A plane is brought down over the Atlantic. A person happens to be on it who's quite important. And the whole thing is this a terrorist attack just of blowing up a plane, or was it a targeted attack to kill that person? But you never meet that person. You actually meet the crew of the plane. And I was very keen that you like them. And there's clearly a relationship between one of the pilots and the stewardess. And they're talking about this, that, and the other. It's just, I think by the end of that first chapter, which is only 4 or 5 pages long, you should at least feel that the book could be about these characters. Then they die. Yeah. But I do think
that's what makes it so shocking. It's like the moment in Spooks when you're first invested in the characters, and then one of them dies almost immediately.
Yeah.
Kind of, oh, okay, I don't feel entirely safe here, which is a good place to be in a thriller.
Absolutely, and I think it's really important. And so I think that to do that, you have to see some of their life. And so the one with the life we see a bit of Michael and Sarah's life, Michael the barrister, but that really has already been, readers have already seen that in Marked for Death. And obviously I can't assume that everyone who's read Marked for Death will read Power Play. So it's very important to me that you see enough of that life again, that it's not repetitive, but is still illustrative. But really, Power Play is more about Joe Dempsey because he wasn't in Marked for Death. So it's like we've taken the 2 main characters from Killer Intent. The next book is all about Michael. Well, this one is not all about Michael, but it's about Joe, but it's mainly about Dempsey. And so we see Dempsey with his new life in New York. And I think seeing this new character in a new environment, you have to get to know him a bit more.
Yeah, definitely. And you have actually based some of the living conditions or the living arrangements on a place you know very well.
Yes, his flat is in a building called the Stafford Building, which is on York Avenue between 74th and 73rd in Manhattan, which is a real building. It's 35D, so 35th floor, flat D, which is where my wife lived for 10 years. She was, and still is, in fact, the global brand ambassador for her father's perfume company. They have this very fancy perfume company. And that was her job. Her job was to take this very British, quintessentially British perfume and launch it in America. And so they moved her to New York for, I think, 12 years. And in that time, she lived in that flat. And when we first got together, she was between Britain and New York. So half her time would be in New York, which meant I used to fly there for long weekends, at least once a month. And I love America. I love New York. I hate to see what's happening to it now. It's terrible. But, really, it's painful, really. But I love New York. And I'd spent a lot of time there before then, but I'd always been in hotels. And the difference of living there, even if just for a few days at a time, in a flat, in a residential neighborhood, it makes it so different. It makes it so much more real. And so I decided, well, I know this flat, I know it inside out, and I want that Dempsey to live there. So he now lives in Victoria's old flat in the Stafford Building. The only difference, the interior I've described is identical, everything's the same. The only difference is that Victoria used to have this mannequin in the flat, and I'd come out to use the loo in the evening after a few drinks or something, sort of early hours, and every single time I would end up fighting the mannequin because I just think it's an intruder. And it just couldn't, I never got used to it. And I used to ask her to throw it out, but she kept it. And I decided that Dempsey's quite hard. He's certainly a tougher man than me. And I think that if he had the mannequin, that mannequin probably wouldn't get through the first night. So,
yeah.
so we got rid of the mannequin. But apart from that, it's exactly the same.
Oh, brilliant. So you get an insight into that time in your life as well as a great plot.
Yes, I like to think so, yeah. And I concentrate very much on the lovely view from the balcony, which was... The thing is, normal flats in Manhattan, they're not very special. They're small. They're very small. That's the whole thing with New York. You can get the big ones if you can spend 100 million. But most flats, they're very small because they're not really about the flat. They're about the balcony. I mean, and we spent so much of our time just sitting, looking out over New York.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, what what else will you do if you've got that on your skyline?
And it never gets old.
To look at.
Well, I'd fly on a Friday. I used to get a 7 o'clock plane on a Friday, and I'd land at midnight. And Victoria would I'd jump in a yellow cab, or Victoria would pick me up, whichever way. And I'd be back in her house by 1, in the flat by 1, and we'd sit up till 5, just sitting there, looking out. It took a lot of PLUS to achieve that after the flight, but we just sit there, just chatting and looking out over New York. And I really wanted to include that in Power Play, because it's very high concept, it's very action packed, it's very, there's a lot goes on in the Oval Office, and there's presidents and there's guns, but there's also got to be some life. Otherwise you've got no fear of what Dempsey might lose. I think you need to fear the loss in order to care about the character.
Yeah, you always need to establish the stakes.
Yeah.
Speaking of stakes, so you don't need a barrister's skills to work out who we have left to chuck in the cellar. But tell us why you're going to lock Mr. Ritchie in that particular location.
Okay, well, this comes with a legal disclaimer, of course, because I don't want to be sued for any of this. So this is just opinion. An opinion is a legal defence to defamation. So now we've cleared that up, Mr. Ritchie. I just can't stand him. I just cannot stand him.
Fair comment.
It's fair comment. I think he thinks, he wants to be Bradley Walsh. He wants to be what Bradley Walsh has become. The complete national treasure who can do basically anything. When he can't. He can't do any of the stuff Bradley Walsh does as well as Bradley Walsh. He used to live down the road from me, actually, when I was growing up. And so I used to see a lot of him. And I just didn't like him. That's at all. And unfortunately that's just carried over. When he joined, I think I think it's best summed up from when he joined EastEnders. Now I don't watch EastEnders, haven't ever, I don't think. But he joined EastEnders after a huge lull in his career. He was, no one had heard of him for ages, probably why he joined EastEnders. And then he almost immediately left because he was suddenly, he was popular. All right, okay, I'm too big for this. And then left, and then nothing happened. Then he came back. And then within a few months, I'm too big for this, and then left, and then came. And I just can't stand him. And the reason I want him in the cellar is because I've decided that my cellar has its entrance in the kitchen, and frankly, Hannibal can cook him. So,
brilliant!
I would eat that.
You think he would make a particularly lush entree of some kind?
Exactly. Yeah, or just a slow cooked leg.
Yeah, that could work, definitely. Oh, well, poor lad.
It's probably completely unfair. It probably is completely unfair.
Now. Yeah, I'm feeling a little bit sorry for him. I guess that does lead to me thinking one of my favourite things about fiction is the fact that you can give people what they deserve. I wonder if, what kind of kick you get from your endings and from working out who the bad guys and the good guys are and how to deal with them.
I do. I love endings because I never know what's coming. I start with a plan. I know who's going to win, of course, because it's going to be Dempsey and Devlin. It's just that's no spoiler for anything, is it? That's what we write. It's like saying, "Well, Jack Reacher might win." Of course, he'll win. But how you win is great. Is to think about how you're going to manage to do this. And I mean, the ending to Power Play, I wrote, which I thought was a lovely ending, a really nice ending. And my editor, Pippa, sent it back with a suggestion of, well, I'm not sure this works because of who your main characters are. And I love that ending. And then so I very grudgingly wrote a completely different ending, which had the same level of justice for the bad guys. But just, that bit, and it works so much better. I mean, editors are amazing, and sure you know yourself. If you have a good one, things that you really think are working so well, and then you give their suggestion a go and realise, oh my God, you were so right. Why was I so angry when you suggested it? Because I do think that the relationship between a writer and an editor during the first big edit process, I think it is only the first big edit, but during the first big edit process, certainly my understanding of that relationship is it's a relationship of a certain amount of underlying, I hate everything you have said, with also the pure knowledge that you are almost certainly right, and I've got to at least give it a go because you've improved right so many times. And so that's what I say. I don't know how anything ends. I don't. I'll get there. I'll end it. and then I might end it again after the copy edit in a completely different way. But what's important is, so far, with the exception of a bit of a twist in Marked for Death, so far everybody has got their just desserts, and but realistic just desserts, and not always completely. I mean, Killer Intent ends in a way that a couple of people have said, "Oh, I wish that X had happened." You know, everything is tied up, but you know, I wish everyone knew about it rather than it being a cover up afterwards. And you say, well, it is a political thriller. You know, they're not honest. The cover up is probably far more realistic than, oh, this is exactly what happened, let's tell the world. But ultimately, that is a tangent. They get their just desserts in my books, and I think because of what I do for a living, seeing justice actually done, you know, 100% confidence that that is the justice, that is what, you know, we know they're the bad guys, we know they did it, and this is what happens to them. It's like it's catharsis, I suppose. Yeah. Because I mean, I've had trials where I've lost and I'm convinced my defendant was innocent, and therefore I'm convinced that an innocent man is in prison. One or two of them, in fairness, in 20 years, but it's happened, and it's depressing. I've had other cases where I've seen people get off, and you just think, well, that's just not right. I mean, it's professionally a good thing from my point of view, but if you sit and look at it from a society point of view, not so great. So I think because of what I do for a living, long way of answering your question, I do apologize. I think because of what I do for a living, seeing people get their just desserts on the page and knowing that they are their just desserts is something I really enjoy about what I do.
It is fascinating to hear it from that point of view, because I think it's, whether you work in the law or even if you're whatever area you work in, we all have that perception that there will be times when the bad guys get away with it.
Yeah.
Whether it's the workplace or in the school playground.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And that, I think, is one of the things that we love about reading stories, but also about writing them, definitely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I found that really fascinating insight into your writing process, and also into the legal side, and a little bit into your domestic arrangements.
Yeah, maybe not as much as we intended.
One way or another. So everybody should know that the incredible power play and you know, that opening, amazing, and the reviews that you're getting are some of the best I've seen for a thriller. Looking at them on Amazon, it's really good. So all of those people, guys, cannot be wrong. If you haven't got hold of Power Play already,
a couple of them are wrong. One or two of them.
All of the reviews,
the negative ones.
The average, and we do try very hard as writers not to look at our own Amazon reviews, I think, but someone else can tell you when it's looking good. Power Play is available now, and thank you, Tony, for joining us. I just want to give a little plug to tomorrow's guest, because we've got a really good set of people. I'm so grateful that people have been up for doing it, and the people that we have coming up include Paul Burston and Mark Edwards. But tomorrow we have got Ellie Griffiths, aka Domenica De Rosa, whose latest, The Lantern Men, is the 12th book in the Ruth Galloway series, and she also writes the Brighton Mysteries, which I love to pieces, being a Brighton resident. So you can join us tomorrow at same time, same place, and I will give a little quick gratuitous plug to my own book. So if you do want to get a little bit of comfort in these lockdown days when we're not really seeing many other people outside our household, you can feel better if you read The House Share, because it is packed with the kind of people you really would not want to be in lockdown with. 7 housemates, 7 lies. Would you join The House Share? It's available now. Thanks to Tony. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back this time tomorrow.